Welcome to Learning cEDH, the podcast dedicated to teaching you everything you need to know about competitive Commander. I'm Matthew. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host Eric. And today we're doing one of our favorite things to do here on the series, and that is doing our quarterly updates. It's already July. We're already more than halfway through the year. Scary thought to have, but we're here. And we got 3 months worth of data to take a look at from tons and tons of cEDH tournaments that have been firing recently. We're going to get to look at a little bit of the tail end. We're at about a month-ish of Modern Horizons 3, so we get to see a little bit of that. And it is going to be very apparent that it had an impact just looking at these the numbers here. We got a lot of big shakeups. I'm pretty excited to get to talk about it.
Do you have any major predictions before we dive into it?
Predict for this one or the next one? Because I already kind of looked at this one. You know, I'm a little spoiled.
Yeah. I was trying to put the suspense for the audience.
Yeah, so and you can look at previous stuff we talked about and like other videos that I've done where we've talked about rock size showing up pretty highly, pretty hot. There's been decks that have been on a downtrend like Kinnan, Sisay and Tymna Kraum are just, even though they got no cards, just expect them to continue to be very good. I don't think going into this, even before looking at it, I would have had a crazy hot take. I don't think I would have known exactly, because a lot of the thing people are wanting to know is like, where's Nadu? What's Nadu? I get so many comments about it and people discuss it. I don't think I could have predicted exactly where Nadu is or if it would have been on this list, you know? So it's numbers for this quarter. I don't think I would have predicted, but yeah, we're going to get to talk about the bird today. If this is your first time watching one of these, what we're going to be doing is taking a look at the last 3 months worth of results using EDH Top 16. We're going to be filtering for events that had 64 players or more and taking a look at the decks that had the most top 16s in that period, as well as going over their conversion rate. And we're going to kind of talk through the decks, why we think they're positioned well or why they've moved down, up, wherever they've gone. Try to make sense of what's happening in cEDH right now, and especially post MH3, kind of get a sense of maybe where we think the meta game is shifting towards and maybe make some predictions for the next one, as well as talk about, this is our last update before the Topdeck Invitational, and that's going to be like a pretty big hot topic. Tons of people have been grinding to get into that event, and everybody's going to be looking to see what, when we have all the best players in the same room, what actually ends up taking it down.
Do you have a prediction for that event? What do you think's going to win the actual invitational? Because there's going to be 2 events there.
Yeah.
Be a platinum event, another 256 player event.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's going to be the platinum event, which is going to be your top 64-ish players within the I would think roughly the United States in that area, unless we've got some people coming in from somewhere I don't know about. But
yeah, it's really hard because I think what you tend to see is people play it really safe with their deck selections. So I don't expect some wild dark horse to come in, other than maybe someone who's been grinding in some events that maybe shows up with a deck that they've already been doing, right? Like if Aaron is Street Urchin showed up and top 16 or top 4 the main event, wouldn't surprise me if someone qualified on that. Something like that. But I don't know. It's really hard to say. I think the meta looks really fast right now, but I almost wonder if you get all of the grinders and yappers in one room for that event, if it's every single round is going to be those mid-range slogs, where everyone is super respectful and mulliganing really appropriately, and that some of the more all-in turbo decks actually struggle, even though it is going to be really good pilots. You're going to have Ori's going to be there on Rockside, right? Or people like that. So I don't know. It could be a Tymna Kraum fest, but then it could be that's kind of the cycle we're in right now. And as we get to the list, we'll see any given day, if there's a lot of Tymna Kraums, but then there's also a lot of Sisays, and then there's also a lot of rock size. It's just the cycle that feeds, and what decks end up coming out on top usually ends up being more player dependent, But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Tymna Kraum had a ridiculous showing there where they're just incredibly popular, but maybe they just still don't get there. I don't know. It's really hard. I think we're out of the time we were where just saying more than likely Tymna Kraum wins an event is the case. I think there's 3 decks in the top tier right now, I think, versus whereas you could definitely have argued Tymna Kraum was by itself for a little bit.
I agree with that. All right, let's dive in.
Before we hop into it, if you enjoy this episode, like comment, subscribe. Let us know what you want us to talk about next. Thank you to all the Lemora's Cards patrons over on Patreon. And go buy merch. I usually forget to talk about that, but you can get like this Corvold shirt over on Spring. That's in the description below as well. I guess before we talk about it too, we do have some upcoming events we'll be attending. I'm going to be at the Beholder 10K at CCS. That's at the end of this month. That's one of those last chance qualifier events. You have an event coming up you're going to be at as well, right?
Yes, July 13th. It's a gold event in Colombia. I've played there multiple times already. I've played there once, twice, 3 times. I have a grand total loss. I think I've only lost like maybe 2 or 3 rounds at that event. No, 1 round. I've lost 2. Yeah, at that store, I've lost 2 actual rounds.
So you're go ahead and predicting a win, right? Basically, right? Or at least the top. You saying you're going to top it?
I mean, I'm playing obviously a deck that doesn't have a ton of agency in the game, so it just really depends.
Yeah.
Every time I think it's actually going to get harder because I think people like, I don't know. I get a lot of pregame chatter before we ever sit down. Actually, it was really shocking. That's how it was at Cowtown as well. There was a lot of pregame chatter about me being Corvold. It's like, I think everyone can see my commander and they can get it. It just doesn't phase me. I could literally care less about all that stuff. I just think it's really funny. Yeah, we'll see how that tournament goes. I was really disappointed with my Cowtown result, 21st out of 256. So I didn't really get a lot of points for that. But overall, like I'd like to make a push to the potentially the top 15 players on that, because I really didn't start my push to play in the Invitational until the second half of the season.
Yeah.
So all my points have come from the second half. So if I was this consistent this whole time, I think I would probably effectively be somewhere in that top 10 range,
yeah, like be a little bit more like secure, because I know there's gonna be a lot of people. I mean, you're still pretty high up, so I mean, you're still in a pretty good spot.
Yeah, I'm ranked 26 right now.
Yeah, though there are going to be lots of people, and there's lots of events happening that are like in that. Every weekend, people are trying to get more and more points as they can. So, as always, attend your local cEDH events if you get a chance to, and get you some points if that's what you care about, or just get you some games in. But I think with all that being said, we can go ahead and hop into it. Use the link in the description below to download Whatnot, and you'll get $15 to use to buy Magic singles, sealed product, get anything that you want, really. There's no limits. You just get $15 on the account for free just for signing up. This is one of the best ways you can support the channel. And again, it's just free stuff. Use the link in the description below. Give Whatnot a try. Welcome to Topdeck.gg, your community's home for everything competitive Magic has to offer. Whether you're hosting an event, playing for a huge prize, or trying to advertise your store to thousands of players, we've got you covered. Using intuitive pairing software, playing Magic is a breeze. All your players have to do is sign up online, then scan the QR code in store. Give your competitors the gift of perfect information as their bracket updates in real time. Then, when the match is decided, our self-reporting software saves you time and leaves paper match slips in the past. Leave the heavy lifting to us so your community can sit back, relax, and have a great day of playing Magic. First up, like we do, we're going to talk about some honorable and maybe dishonorable mentions, some decks that didn't quite make it to the top 10, and what we're thinking about either how they've moved or, why they might be able to come up into the top 10 going forward, things like that.
As you know, we've been covering this, and we've had some predictions that we've talked about before about certain decks, of like how popular they were, what happened, what changed, and then why these decks keep kind of maybe either they stay high. We know that all about Tymna Kraum, the variations of Sisay, Rogsai, but then there's decks that were kind of really high up there that have had a fall from grace. And this is, by the way, when I say fall from grace, this doesn't mean it's not a competitive deck at all. This is just when it was in the top 4 to 5 or, somewhere in that range, and it's not even in the top 10. So that's a pretty big deal. First one I'm going to talk about is Atraxa Grand Unifier. 7 top 16s, over 50 entries. So that's a 14% conversion rate, and it's ranked at number 17th right now.
Decently popular deck. It's not like one of the most popular, but there are decks in the top 10 that have less entries than this list or this commander. It's one of those that even for a while when it was doing well, people were kind of surprised and just wondering, how is this clunky deck doing so well? One, it's doing things that you don't see other successful decks tend to do, right? Food Chain's not a super popular option, hasn't been for a little bit, and Atraxa was like a new Food Chain commander that actually did something when you cast it, and we kind of see that with Atali too since then. But Atraxa giving you access to so many colors is pretty nice. But yeah, I think one, like I mentioned, it's been a clunky-ish deck for a little bit. When you don't have a commander as a fallback and instead it's like I have a million mana to do a commander or it's just a combo outlet, that gives you a little bit less consistency where you're more relying on your mulligans, early on to I have to just have good cards. I can't rely on a commander to dig me out of something for the most part. And then also it is a slower deck. Usually people are playing it a little more control-y. And right now we're going to see a lot of pretty aggressively slanting decks or decks that have a ton of inevitability throughout the game trend a lot hotter than Atraxa is. And I think you might be seeing that. That deck is like often compared to like Tivit, which is a deck that is, doing better than Atraxa, but is still not doing, it's not its peak by any means. That play style maybe just not doing the best right now.
Yeah. I can agree with that. There's not really anything else I'd want to say about Atraxa.
Yeah, it's still a cool deck if you like big old Phyrexian Angel commanders, like you're in good colors if you want to play it. It's still a perfectly reasonable deck. Not at its best right now, and it's not a deck I actually really predict to come back into the top 10 anytime soon. Maybe could get something that changes that, but just like the way things are playing out right now, I don't expect this to just make a random comeback off of its power level. It would just have to be like some really good pilots who decide they really want to grind with it. Another one in a not really a similar boat, but like in terms of how often it showed up on the list and how it's performed, kind of similar to Atraxa, with Tevish Kraum, which has been at points one of the, based on which stats you're looking at, one of the highest performers with like crazy high conversion rates, very high actual in-game win rates relative to the amount of players it saw. There was a little period where like obviously like Sharky's grinded with the deck a lot, and then like Comedian had picked it up and was doing well with it, like top 4s and wins. But now down to 18th right under Atraxa with 6 top 16s, 45 entries, 13.33% conversion rate. It's a little hard to say. I know this deck does slant more mid-rangey just because of what the commanders offer. If you're playing this, you are opting to go slower than like Roxai. It is a deck that I've usually recommended to people as a nice way to get into the game, and as like it has a really stable game plan, like a really good backup to a strong Grixis build. I actually think you might want to slant a little faster with how it's built. Like Sharky's Cowtown list, I really liked running like all the extra turn spells, like really looking like a Roxai that just has this infinite mana outlet as well as a nice fallback to draw cards in the zone. Instead of like using those as a main plan, using those as your fallback plan, kind of like the proactive Tymna Kraum decks. I think those builds you could still expect to see good results with, but if your plan is like Tivish uptick, Tevish downtick the next turn, like that's pretty slow right now. And there's also a ton of creatures lying around. Tevish is at its most pressured. I think a deck that definitely could pop back up, but right now is in competition with a very high performer in its same colors that has a lot of strengths that seem better at the moment.
And I guess we'll just go over the very last one. A commander that was pretty popular that's kind of dropped off quite a bit is Talion the Kindly Lord with 5 top 16s, 41 entries at a 12.2% conversion rate, and that's ranked at like 21st.
Yeah, this was a deck that was like always, even when it wasn't in the top 10, it was always hovering around that like 13-ish, something around there, where it was like pretty popular. When it first came out, the biggest thing was like all it does is draw. That was the big thing that people had with it. But then, everyone was like also super heavy on the clones when they were building it. People were running like both Sakashimas, and it seemed like people cleaned it up. Being in a control shell right now isn't really what I'm trying to do, especially when I don't have a way to close it out with like the white cards. I think that like the issue with Talion is like you play this counterspell war all game, and if you don't win the last one, it doesn't matter. Like if you don't somehow shut out people, kind of sucks. Some people who are grinding it, like I know like Max P was playing this deck a decent bit, right? And then he's now playing just out of nowhere Tymna Jessica. At least I didn't expect it to be on that. Could be that there's less people playing it now. I mean, it's kind of hard for me to want to play a commander that's just a draw engine and that isn't Tymna Kraum with like all the tools that they have access to. That was kind of my thing with Talion. Talion itself is like a better card than either of those two commanders, but just like access to Underworld Breach and Dockside and silence effects, pretty busted.
Plus the ability to just run Talion in your list if that's what you want to be doing, if it's that type of game plan. So
yeah, just in a weird spot right now. It is probably in really competent hands. Still a decent option. It's just going to be really tricky in those like multi-turbo pods. But I feel like if you're in those pods that are like TNK, a Roxai, any other deck, you probably a good pilot's going to be able to navigate through those games pretty well still and get a lot of value out of Talion. It's just like, I don't know, it's going to be tricky. This is a tricky playstyle. And then we got a couple we're going to talk about that just barely missed our decks that are at 12th and 11th that also just happen to be decks that we've been playing recently. So at 12th, we had Rograk and Thrasios with 8 top 16s, 50 entries, 16% conversion rate. I mean, I've done an entire video on this deck. I don't really have to talk about it too much. If I just did better, I could have tied. I played 2 events, dude. I could have got 2 tops. A deck that is very strong. It's really still figuring itself out. I think is the thing with Rogthras, where people are kind of struggling to really get it dialed in exactly what you want. People can't decide if we want to run Earthcraft. We've got like people can't decide if they want Hullbreaker Horror. I know Sam Black was rocking some wild stuff this at Cowtown, like Sneak Attack, which I hadn't even considered, but sure makes your Cloudstone loops real easy. But also, like, if I'm on Sneak Attack, bro, let me throw a Hullbreaker and a Tolly back in there. Yeah, Rogthras, still a deck I think is really powerful. I might be taking a break from it. I've really been missing just Grixis stuff and getting to cast black spells. They're really good. And also just feeling like I can go to an event and not think about my deck list before I go to it. That's kind of a thing that I would value at the moment, because I think with Rogthras right now, any given event, I'm probably changing a couple cards in between just because I'm still not 100% sure what the deck's supposed to look like. And it doesn't seem like anybody is. Like, there's no person I can point you towards who's bringing the same list and is doing consistently well with it every single time.
Yeah, I definitely understand the pain of like having to change a few cards out every single like event, just because either they're just not slam dunks, or they're more situational, or they just never show up, and you're trying to always maximize a card slot into a list. So I definitely understand that dilemma for sure.
Yeah, I'm really just wanting to let somebody else deal with it right now. That's kind of my thought. Just like let Sam, some of the other people figure it out. Somebody else will get there, and I won't have to worry about it.
And then number 11, we have Corval the Faker's King, 8 top 16s, 45 entries with a 17.78 conversion rate. So not great, not terrible.
Yeah, right in there.
Yeah.
Another deck we've talked about a little bit on the channel.
Yeah, it's fair to say that this is probably the highest Corval's ever been, I believe, in one of our breakdowns for a quarterly review. It really kind of took off in terms of popularity, not even popularity, but just like pilots are kind of around the world, as not just here, started playing. And there were like 2 that top 16 in like a big commander event in China. There were actually more so builds like over here, like the American style builds, not at all like any kind of APAC region based build of Corval where they play like tons of lands, those type of things. So It's good to see that there's some influence over here, going across the world, which is kind of awesome. But people kind of saw what Corval could really do in the hands of like not a magician slipping cards in.
Just someone playing.
Yeah, and as I mentioned before, I was literally a draw away from top 16 this event. Didn't even play my best game. Actually played like pretty trash to my standard. So the fact that I was still like right there the whole time, I absolutely felt like I was pretty comfortable with Corval this weekend as a deck, not inherently my play. So I think Corval is a total fine deck. If a good pilot plays Corval and they know the deck really well, I mean, I think it has the ability to kind of always be in the conversation of like a top 10-ish deck. Maybe not like it won't ever be in the top whatever unless it gets some just dockside number 2 in the command zone, as a partner with Corval. But
we need a companion. It needs a new companion. There we go.
Especially for a non-partnered commander, for as old as it is, and not being blue.
Yeah.
Like it's actually pretty up there. So I was really impressed with that.
I think with that, we can go ahead and hop into our top 10. If I'm remembering history of the last 3 months, Thunder Junction wasn't out in our last quarterly update. That came out.
It was not.
No,
it was not.
Yeah, Thunder Junction and MH3, and I guess technically Assassin's Creed. Immediately, we're going to see some impact from those sets with our number 10, which had 10 top 16s out of 40 entries for a 25% conversion rate, and that is Stella Lee Wildcard, which came out really hot out the gate. It immediately, the weekend it was legal, got like 2 or 3 tops, I think. This one, it's really powerful and consistent. Like Stella just combos with a billion different cards. It's kind of a stupid design, and it won't be the only one we talk about, where especially throwing this in a precon, just 3 mana commander in a precon, and it goes infinite with like a million different cards in its color. Like that's a wild design we would not have seen in previous years, where they've specifically talked about how they avoid that kind of thing. I think we're in a period of discussing cEDH bait as some of the sets stuff that they make now. Stella Lee does have kind of a reputation as like, oh, you just shut out the commander, you kill the commander, oh, they can't do anything, their cards are bad, they run like Ponder, they run bad cards, they run cantrips, expedites, stuff like that. But it just wins out of nowhere. And with just like 2 cheap cards, it's just like you get Stella Lee out any point. It does generate value while you're doing the thing. If you get shut out and have to just recast it, as you cast spells, you get to impulse draw off the top of your library. You can use it to just help you win a counterspell war, just deactivating the Stella, or get more value out of another big spell. Like you can, if I can't go combo off this turn, I can use Stella, tap it, copy a Jessica's Will. 2 Jessica's Wills doesn't have necessarily to win you the game to win you the game. Stella does offer a lot on top of having a million different 1-card combos out of the zone for your 3 mana commander, which isn't, as far as a 2-color combination goes, probably the best colors you can get for 2 colors, depending, but easily 2 of the better colors that you have access to.
Yeah, and where I like to see Stella Lee is to me, it has probably become the premier, like, is it commander right now? I know like Kark Sakashima is pretty up there, but again, that deck has a higher learning curve for people, and still ultra powerful deck in the right hands of a wizard. They'll be able to do some really cool stuff. But what Stella Lee reminds me of is it's a faster turbo version of what Niv Mizzet like kind of offers. Like, granted, Niv Mizzet's a very big protection based deck, so where I think it's like Niv Mizzet has all these like counter spells and like all the support to protect Niv Mizzet, that type of stuff. Stella Lee turns, instead of playing a bunch of counter spells, which it plays all the good ones, it plays all the cantrips instead. So it converges on the plan. So they're both Spellslinger decks in the end, but ultimately what Stella Lee can do is something that Mizzet doesn't do, is play Underworld Breach. Whether or not like how easy or hard Underworld Breach is to get, it's still like one of the most powerful cards in the game. And the fact that that card only like can enhance Stella Lee. I mean, it's a 3-mana commander versus 6-mana commander. It's easier to recast. You get access to Breach. I don't know. I think it's a no-brainer in my opinion.
Yeah, and we did see Kark Sakashima get new cards and have a pretty good conversion rate. Like, it's 14th on this list with like 7 tops with a 26, almost 27% conversion rate. So it's doing pretty well. Maybe just needs more people on it. But again, it is like, compared to Stella Lee, especially like executing a win with Stella Lee, it's copy it, untap her. I did it. Kark Sakashima usually is a little bit more work than that. And you're also fighting your own stacks piece that you have as a commander sometimes. But Stella Lee, it is really similar to Niv in the other way too, that it is like we have 1-card combos with this commander, but one of the commanders is 6 mana, 6 pips, and has pretty niche cards that combo with it, and are awkwardly, none of them are the card type that actually triggers Niv, versus Stella Lee, which everything about it just lines up kind of the way you want it to, with like the card types and the mana values and everything. I do think there is a chance we see it drop, not because, I don't know, it sucks or anything, just because we may see less interest in it going forward, because this is the very first quarter with it legal, and like I said, it had like a lot of entries right as it came out. There were a lot of people hyped for it. So if like interest dies down, or if even people learn to respect the deck better, and you only have like a couple pilots who stick with it and do well, you could see its numbers drop. This was the new most busted commander that had ever been printed, and then like a month and a half later, there's a different one. There's already been another one that we're all going to be talking about. So I don't know that it'll stay here, but I think it has the power level, if people stick to it, to be in this top 10 to top 15 sort of conversation.
Yeah. So number 9 is Najeela the Blade Blossom with 11 top 16s, 48 entries, with a pretty respectable 22.92 conversion rate percent. I was having this conversation with my friend Christian. He's a Najeela player. He's been playing Najeela for quite a while, probably the longest deck he's ever like stuck with in terms of cEDH. And he played virtually the NBC style list, where it's just kind of a 5-color ad nauseum deck. We were just talking, and I looked at him and I go, and just thinking about how the build is, and I was like, why play Najeela like over Sisay Clam Chowder style? It's like you're both a 3-mana commander. You both have a combo with your commander, and one's just really good with Dockside. Like, one's busted with Dockside. Like, obviously, if you play Dockside and get some Najeela combats, it's good, but you have to have other pieces to kind of go into it, right? Like, you both run to Derevi. Like, I don't know. We just got talking, and then I was just like, and the ability to search up like something like a Teferi a Cutzel just to basically silence the board. Your floor is a Thassa's Oracle ad nauseum deck with Underworld Breach. That's your floor. When you really looked at the decks and broke it down, and even your auxiliary pieces that support it were just good, like Agatha's Soul Cauldron. So when I looked at Najeela, I don't want to say the deck isn't good anymore because it's a good deck. Like it's got powerful cards, all that type of stuff. But what I see with Najeela is that it flounders between the attacking package and then the ad nauseum package. And then your mana pips are just a little bit awkward. And I just really think when they moved away from Druid's repository as a whole, I thought that actually hurt the deck quite a bit because that was a way to get that free mana to do the combo. And if that's the plan, and I just think the more we see these decks, there's more creatures in play, typically. Aside from like something like Rogsai, Magda, Tivit, Nadu, Kenrith, Kinnan, Blue Farm, they're going to be, Sisay, they're going to be applying stuff to the board. So that plan just isn't as good anymore, in my opinion. But I could be wrong. But I just think Najeela really doesn't have a lot to offer. Like, it's not inherently a superior ad nauseum list. It's not even as good as a nauseum deck as Corvold. You know, when you don't have access to reanimate and abuse Dockside, it does have the Breach and the Savine's Reclamation. But again, we're talking about a 5-color deck needing all these different types of pips to do the thing. And then when they went away from like the talismans and those type of things, the things that provided the mana that allowed the deck to function. I think once you kind of start adding all these new cards in, the deck loses a lot of what actually made it successful.
I think one part of it is the Najeela like inevitable win. It doesn't stack up compared to the other decks that have that now. Like especially like compared to like any build of Sisay.
Yeah.
Where, like either Clam Chowder or the Planeswalker build, they're gonna get to their activations as a win condition, even like or a combo piece a lot easier than Najeela tends to, because again, Najeela is really face up. Najeela's ability to do it is affected by anybody having creatures in play. You can get into really stacked out games where Najeela just attacking will win the game, but like I don't think we're in that era really as much anymore where that's the thing that's going to win you the games, except for the non-Nas Najeela builds that we see right now that are running things like potentially like Deafening Silencer, Archon of Emiria, or just like the big Chatterfang, Warren Soul Trader, like those kind of very heavy leaning on the creatures, like similar to like what Memo played at Punt City 3, that are really leaning into the Najeela pressure plan with like mid-range, decent, mid-range advantage, like leaning into the Samuts and those things that have come into Najeela, and those cards being more of a focus and, winning with like Druid's Repository, like running those kind of cards. I don't know if that necessarily is better than the 5-color Nas Najeela, but it at least does something that the other decks aren't doing better. Because right now, if you want to do 5-color traditional mid-range, you should probably play Kenrith. Even if doing like creature-heavy stuff, Kenrith has, 1, it breaks Dockside, like most good decks in this format. And 2, just does have like an outlet in the zone that doesn't care about what your opponents are doing. You don't have to like go to combat to do it. They're not trying to force their deck into a 5-color Nas pile. They're just doing the thing. And then you also have Sisay, which is incredibly consistent, one of the most consistent decks in the format. Sisay wins by casting Dockside Extortionist. That just wins them the game when they resolve that spell. Like, yeah, you could play a Sika or whatever, any other cheap Jeweled Lotus 5-color commander and have decent results with it. But is it going to like give you something better than the other ones now? Probably not. And like you're saying, I don't know that Najeela is giving you all that much to consider to like really want to run it versus some of the other options you have right now.
And to like round out that conversation I was having with him was just like, your commander doesn't break Dockside Extortionist. Like, yeah, like you're an ad nauseum deck and you don't maximize what Dockside does. And if you're not doing that, I don't know if that's the type of deck I'd want to be playing. And that's not to say that you can't run Nas without like breaking Dockside, but you need Dockside Extortionist. I think having that as a backup too, where your commander just either wins with Dockside or it just abuses Dockside of some variety, like Sisay does. It's really, really impactful in these 5-color builds. It's not just about the mana fixing or casting your spells and all that type of stuff. Because when you're trying to put a Dockside on the stack in these kind of decks, you're typically trying to win the game.
Number 8, another deck that's dropped off quite a bit. I think it's been as high as 2 and down to 8 now with 12 top 16s, 87 entries for a 13.7% conversion rate. That is Tivit, Seller of Secrets, the big Esper dude who continues to just kind of drop just a little bit. It went to 3. We went to that 5-ish range. I gotta think that 8 is the lowest it's ever been for our coverage. I don't think it's dropped this low before.
Definitely not. This is the lowest for Tivit. 12 top 16s, pretty impressive. That's always a good one, especially for 3 months. But with 87 entries, I mean, that's a pretty low conversion rate. That's like one of the lowest in our top 10 review.
Second lowest that we're looking at.
I mean, I don't think there's anything else to say about what we haven't said about Tivit specifically. It's not a Dockside Extortionist deck. Dockside is a focal point of our format. And that's not to say that you cannot play Dockside, because we see other decks do well without Dockside. But when you are a big mana deck, because you have a expensive commander, you really need that nitro button to just kind of get you there. And again, you don't get Underworld Breach, you don't get Dockside. Without those kind of cards, you do lose a lot of your speed or your inevitability. And I mean, I think Tivit's very good. It's a ultra powerful commander. When it hits play, it's really scary. But I think also too, people have figured it out. They figured out what to give them when they attack, whether treasures or clues. People have adapted to understanding based on the game state and conversations at hand. They just kind of know how to navigate Tivit a little bit, and they know better interaction points with Tivit.
And knowing when, because you will get into pods where the Tivit player can politic to like you have a Force of Will in hand or something that counters it, and they can kind of navigate there or try to politic to getting Tivit to resolve. And in some pods, it's like, this is what you got to kind of do. Like if there's the turbo deck just demonic tutored, I probably can't force the will this Tivit. But if you get into those games where things get longer, you can't. Yeah, people know you can't let Tivit resolve. You're gonna hit it with a strict Serenade, give him a 2/2, and yeah, it's kind of like what we talked about with Atraxa and to an extent Talion, where these are very the ways Tivits are built now are pretty Esper control-y mid-range shells. They're running the Grafdigger's cages and the blind obedience and stuff like that to survive to where they're advantaged. And yeah, right now we're in a bit more of a just win meta where you need to kind of do something broken. And Tivit is like good but not broken, I think is where it is kind of my thoughts on it. Like you said, the most broken cards it doesn't have access to, they're red. Any deck can Thoracle Consult, whatever. But again, it is like the consistency from the commander comes when you're at 6 mana. Right now, it's coming in a little bit late. You don't get to be a Fierce Guardianship deck, really. You probably shouldn't be. He can really prey upon a slower game, and he always has that 1-card win con. But he has a pretty expensive 1-card win con as far as most of these decks go. Speaking of breaking Dockside, number 7.
Magda, Brazen Outlaw, 12 top 16s, 52 entries with 23.08 conversion rate. So really solid showing for Magda. Magda's kind of hanging out right there. We've seen this trend recently. I'm sure if you've been watching any of Matt's coverage of the decks, Magda's kind of always somewhere in the top 16. It's just one of those decks that does a really good job not playing spells once it's like established the Magda. Or if it can play into Heuristic, it's like it can go like cast my dwarf, pay the 1, and then it doesn't feed Mystic Remora. Typically, it allows you to kind of work under that veil right there. And then Magda's one of those interesting decks that like I don't think enough people still understand and respect Magda a lot, because if it's too late to interact, it's too late. Like Magda's gonna go over, like it's gonna go over the top of whatever you're trying to do. So
they just get better and better. Like Roaming Throne was an insane upgrade for this deck. They got Bottle Cap Blast, which is just an improvised removal spell that gives them tap treasures for the extra damage they deal. They got a lot out of Thunder Junction, including a new Magda that also makes treasures. One of the best Flare of Duplication decks. Period. You sack an idiot little dwarf, just a little 1/1 with like Mountain Walk. They've got a lot of new tools. They were already good. We're kind of seeing their numbers level out, where I think last time we looked at it and I was talking about it, they had kind of absurdly high conversion rate, but relatively low play, where they were like 40% with less numbers. And this is like probably more realistic and reasonable of what they're going to look like with a decent amount of play with like 52 entries. Having that 23% conversion rate seems reasonable. Any given month might go up or down, but like we've talked about, this is one of those decks that just, if the game goes on, Magda will win. There will be an opening. They'll figure something out and they can just win on top of you. They have just so much ability to just get there, and just if they're patient, they're going to get to do the thing at some point, and they don't have to cast spells to do it.
And it just benefits from the continuation printing of anything that makes treasures. It's going to always get something. Wizards likes to keep printing vehicles. I'm sure it'll continuously get some kind of vehicle or something like that of that nature that just happens to be really specifically only good in Magda. Good showing for Magda. What do you got at number 6?
Number 6, newcomer to the list. We've got, with 13 top 16s, 42 entries, and a 30.95% conversion rate. We got Nadu, Winged Wisdom, the MH3 bird. It's still a little tricky to evaluate. So I covered Cowtown, where 2 of them topped. They top 16. And I even covered, probably by the time this comes out, you'll have seen me cover the Command Fest tournament in China, where I think another 2 topped that as well. And then the last Command Fest I covered, it was like 2 or 3 that topped it. So it is showing up. It was really interesting talking to people at Cowtown. Pretty much everyone felt like Nadu was bad. Like, everyone who was playing it was like, I'm getting just hated out. It's not working, blah, blah, blah. A lot of people are just like, you just killed the commander. And it's cool when you say that. But, here it is. It is still doing well. That event, Cowtown, was very stacked. It still got 2 top 16s there. It's hard to say where it'll line up. Because I think to some people, I undersold this card for cEDH. And then it felt like people were starting to be, the more they played against it, more down on it in terms of like tournament EDH, but it is still doing really well. So I don't know where I'm landing on it or where it will end up, but it is a deck that you have to, no matter what, even like Winota, this is still the case too. You have to respect it or you'll lose to it. They're a little bit slower than you might expect. That's like the big thing with this deck. Like, they have to get a commander in play and a piece or 2. You kind of want a creature or 2 when you're doing the thing. But when they do, you can't really outgrind their ability to do this stuff. It's just gonna happen. If they get Nadu and then like 1 or 2 other creatures and Shuko in play, they're probably going to get more value than the rest of the table can get out of like their Ristics and their commanders in that turn cycle. And they might just win. Like, there's just always, because the lands come in untapped and they just get to run all these cheap creatures and things that trigger it, there's like almost always some chance they can just win.
Can I tell you a guilty pleasure about Nadu that just, I don't know, it brings joy to my heart every time I hear it and or say it, and that's just Shuko's Up. Like, I started saying Shuko's Up like in front of Christian, and when we were at Cowtown, he goes, "What are you talking about?" And then I showed him the Gold Sabertooth Shuko's Up thing, and then he loved it. So we texted in our friends group, and I was like, "Just remember, boys, Shuko's Up today." Just, it's so dumb, but it's fun, and I think Nadu is a cool card. I like Simic land combo stuff a lot, as it's always appealed to me. And the fact that this can do it, and not only did it not just do well, obviously, this past weekend, but it obviously, in a different format, took over. And
just destroyed Modern.
Yeah, that was the Pro Tour. So to have a card that's powerful in Modern and Commander, whether it like wins a big event in cEDH or not, like that shows you the strength of a card that's a multi-format playable, like top tier card. So,
and it's another deck that people haven't, I'm not in like a Nadu Discord trying to figure the deck out, but just having already covered 6 or maybe even 8 of them, there's a lot of things that people haven't reached a consensus on, even among the decks that are doing well. Things like whether you play the Sea King's Blessing effects. That's basically like 50-50 of Nadu's do or don't. Earthcraft seems to only be in about a third of the ones that I've covered. The land count from 30 to 34. And I know he hasn't played in an event. I know Ken had built one with 40, and he felt pretty confident about that as the count. So I definitely think there is still room for them to optimize it and figure it out. I don't know where it will land. I don't know if it will fall off the top 10 or jump up to top 3, but there's going to be developments for people playing with it and playing against it. And we're going to see it shake out where I'm not, I think the future is still unclear, but obviously for the rest of the time that it's in our format, it will be a deck that can just take over a game at any point. So you will kind of have to respect it if you see it. Next up at 5th with 19 top 16. So huge jump. Yeah. So 8 and 7 were tied for 12. Nadu had 13, and then a massive jump up to 19 for our 5th place deck. 82 entries, 23.17% conversion rate. Kenrith the Return King, which is a deck that has really, we've talked about it having a lot of different builds. And for a while, people were even doing just 5-color Nas with an outlet in the zone. We've seen people do Kenrith as an actual engine, playing like the Biomancer's Familiar and Training Grounds and being like Jewel Lotus Fierce SWAT decks. Now, the main build that I'm starting to see in my coverage, at least, is the sort of Agatha of the Vile Cauldron creature combo activated ability decks that are running things like Warren Soul Trader to help with their Dockside loops, because that card is much, much, much better in a 5-color deck than like Skirk Prospector. It has way more things you can do with it. Still doing their sort of Fimage combos. We're seeing cards like Evolution Witness that lets you combo with Kenrith because you can just put a counter on the Witness with Kenrith, especially if you've reduced the cost of your abilities, and you can just like Bomberman loop with Lion's Eye Diamond among just, hey, buy back a Dockside or whatever, just being able to keep buyback permanent. So like Kenrith and its actual like synergistic stuff that it does has gotten a really big push, and that's kind of like the dominant, like it went from the 5-color good stuff deck of the format to a pretty synergistic looking creature combo build as kind of the main thing. And there still are those other builds, but that's the thing that I've seen, and it's also got the biggest push lately with like the MH3 cards.
Yeah, with the addition, once the Agatha stuff came out, both the Cauldron and the actual creature Agatha, that was actually a big boon for that list, and it finally got kind of widespread adopted by and large. And then now that's what we're seeing. And then, like you said, Warren Soul Trader just happens to be a really good card in the deck. It kind of facilitates something that Skirk Prospector was already doing, but it also can just sack Bowmaster tokens, those type of things to just accelerate, if you really need to in a turn. Like a Dork provides 2 mana effectively. You can like tap it for a green or whatever color, sack it, make a treasure. We talked about Kenrith always being kind of a deck to look out for. It's pretty firmly here. If it was up to me and I was ranking these, I would rank it at number 4 versus number 5 because it's just clearly a better deck right now. And I think it just tends to do something very similar to Sisay in regards of just playing lots of creatures, kind of playing to the battlefield, not putting a ton of things like instant sorceries on the stack. Obviously, it doesn't get to tutor as much, but Kenrith is just a good card on its own. It's a more customizable deck out of all the 5-color lists outside of like Sisay, but Sisay to some degree still has to have like certain levels of dedication to what the actual function of that. Like Kenrith is just the most vanilla 5-color commander that just happens to be good. So
yeah, and it's definitely developed more of an identity, which I think is really cool for a 5-color list. Like we're now at the point like Najeela is the most generic of those decks here. Like Sisay has multiple different builds that, again, like no matter what you're doing with Sisay, it will involve legendary creatures. Otherwise, why run it? But yeah, it's Kenrith getting some new toys, getting tweaked a bit, and just has a lot of options. And I agree with like the deck it's tied with. Really, this is at 4th because number 4 is also at 19 top 16s and has less than half of Kenrith's conversion rate, and that is 19 top 16s, 163 entries. So like double the amount or very close to it that Kenrith had for the same number of tops, 11.66% conversion rate. And that's Kinnan still on, in terms of popularity, still like number 2 in the format. In terms of actual success and popping off, definitely still on a downward trend.
Yeah, we saw this. We saw how Kinnan quickly rose and it was up there. And then I think Kinnan also falls to, it's a really popular deck, so a ton of people pick it up, but it also is really particular on how you navigate a game, whether that it is utilizing your mana available for like, counter spells, drawing cards off heuristics, mystics, when to spend the Kinnan. I think people also kind of mess that sequence up. People they just kind of maybe blind spin Kinnan and they just don't understand like where they're at in the gameplay. Also, let's be like pretty objective. Kinnan has a lot of like not really good cEDH cards in it. Like,
yeah,
I don't think that we always see the Kinnan explosive mana starts, right? With the crypts, the soul rings, the talismans, all that fun stuff, right? That's when it looks really, really good. I would say they cleaned up the list a lot, but when you have cards like Consecrated Sphinx, Glendolin Archmage, Hullbreaker Horror, Nezahal, Nyxbloom Ancient, Perplexing Chimera, Thorn Mammoth, like
Thorn Mammoth especially doesn't.
Yeah.
It's like limited all-star.
Yeah. Void Winterer. It seems like a very low percentage, and I'm not a Kinnan expert. It seems like a very low percentage of cards that are in your deck, but there's still cards that are in your deck. So to add them to your deck, that is definitely going to affect your mulligans. Because what I see from Kinnan a lot is that Kinnan has to mulligan really aggressively, and then they're immediately a threat. Before they're even like untapped, Kinnan seems like a threat because everyone fears the unknown. They fear the top, the spin.
Yeah.
And then Kinnan gets put into this pressured situation where it is like looked upon like, well, you gotta save the table, you gotta spend the Kinnan, and then in reality, like their resources are limited outside of draw engines aside. So I'm not really sure where Kinnan's gonna continue at. I don't know if it's gonna continue putting up results. I mean, there's some good players who still play it. It's still a deck I very much respect in the hands of the right pilots. Like I would never not respect Kinnan. It does just abuse mana like nobody's business. I always feel like kind of Kinnan and Magda are somewhere in the same like ethos in terms of like what it does. They're 2-mana commanders. They play to the battlefield. They don't really have to cast a lot of spells. One has access to blue. One has the consistency of monocolor. Still super powerful deck, but to have that low conversion rate, it's pretty rough.
One of the tensions of Kinnan, like you're talking about how threatening it is that it is very threatening and you have to always be worried about the Kinnan player who has 7+ mana. But because of just how the deck works and in the average game, somewhat relying on the flips to get you somewhere and get you a game plan, you have to play it like a control deck, but it's a control deck that everyone is like constantly worried about you doing anything. So you're in a weird spot where you might be the table police, but people still treat you like the turbo deck at the table. There is a similarity to Magda where Kinnan is like probably better at getting, just coming into play and being a great card and getting you other things. If you want to cast spells, Kinnan can help you do that. But Magda gets one activation and that just sets up the win, basically. Like they get one, they get like the roaming throne, and then they're just set up for when they untap. They attack and get double triggers for treasures, and then they have tutor for win right there. Versus Kinnan, which is like, yeah, sometimes you flip and you flip blind on your turn and you hit Seaborn Muse and you just win. But sometimes you just flip and you put a land. I've flipped Kinnan and put so many Finhorn Elves into play, dude. Like that happens. That's where you're at sometimes. It's again a deck that's like kind of surprising that Kinnan has gotten so few upgrades when you think about it. How like all of the tutors that help you win the game are staple to humans. Like it's always so annoying to flip Trophy Mage, to see Trophy Mage in your flip and have to bottom it. And same thing with like Spellseeker. Any of those cards that can help you get there. Like none of them are ever non-humans. And like it's wild to think that the Kinnan builds have basically, for the most part, barring a few slots that they can change, have stayed the same just because like they're not really getting new big things to flip into. They're not getting that many new utility creatures to run to kind of just help them get consistent. It's like kind of surprising Simic just hasn't gotten something that Kinnan really can use. Versus Magda, which gets an upgrade every single set. It feels like. And Sisay.
Yeah.
Like the other two don't cast spells decks, which I think Kinnan is like on the lower end of that, approaching traditional mid-range in terms of like the macro archetypes for cEDH. I don't know. It doesn't quite get there. There's just some tension in Kinnan that you don't see in the decks that are like most similar to it.
Number 3. This is the one everybody always wants us to talk about. With 28 top 16s, a clean 100 entries at a 28% conversion rate, Rogsai.
Yeah, Rograk and Silas at their highest we've ever talked about them. In the top 3. I think there's been points between quarters that it's been around here. We've seen it around the 5 range. We saw it like almost drop off the list down to like 9, 10 in one of the updates. I think the January update or the one before that maybe. Popping off here to go all the way up to 3. A deck that has quantity-wise not changed very much. I think within the last quarter where we saw most people adopt the like Swan Song out, get probe in sort of build that's a little bit more all in, wanting to, it can check the coast is clear and then crack the top deck tutors and just like opting for another free thing versus the worst counterspell in the deck. And then I got 2 new cards that have very much gone into every single ROG side build, with Flare of Duplication being the like most free, oh my god, I can't believe they printed this for ROG side, card. And then Necro Dominance, which is this being one of the few decks that is opting to run it among a couple others, but basically the ROG sides are pretty much all in on running both Necros right now.
Turns out that a bad Necro is still a decent Necro.
You are already ready to take advantage of it with Born Upon a Wind, Final Fortune, Last Chance, Warrior's Oath. You got 4 cards in the deck that already are like the most powerful Necro enablers. The only thing we don't have is Emergent Zone.
What I was going to say about ROG side though, and this is just extremely evident, if you've ever played with a comparable ROG side pilot, or you play with like a really good play group or you play ROG side yourself, it does something that I think that very little decks can do, and that is legitimately mulligan as low as 3. I mean, technically 2, it has that ability. So in 2 separate tournaments, platinum level events, One being Zane, one being Ori, two really good players, both mulligan to 3. They both won the match. They just had that ability. Zane's was a little bit different. His was very patient. Ori's was very different, but it ultimately was both based on a wheel. Both were able just to get right back into the game, to basically break parity with the whole table. And that is something extremely just powerful about what Rogsai can do that, to me, no other deck can leverage that. So when we talk about what Rogsai turns on, it turns on Fierce Guardianship, Deflecting Swat, Deadly Rollick, which is 10 mana worth of spells. And then now it has Flare Duplication, which is another 3 mana worth of spell. That could either be a counter spell, a combo piece, anything of that nature. Mox Amber's just broken in this list. Like it's just Mox Ruby. We've talked about this. I think we're starting to see two players not wanting to necessarily not play the game, but like they want to be like, I want to present a win versus another draw engine. Like I have Rhystic and Mystic. I don't need it. Like I have Mystic, Rhystic, double Necro, Ad Nauseam, Backside of Bergie and Harnfeld. Like, what else do I really need? You know,
and they're 3 to 4 wheels.
And 3 to 4 wheels. Yes. With that being said, like you're starting to see like really good players like Ori play it. Like,
and you're seeing a couple right now. We're in a spot where the slots are more different than we've seen for a little bit because people aren't sure exactly what goes in, what goes out. I think the cleanest, like the main thing I've been seeing is Conqueror's Flail coming out, and then either like Infernal Plunge or one of the 4 wheels, usually Misfortune, coming out to make room for the Necrodominance and the Flare Duplication. We even saw Ori change up the mana base where he was on 2 Surveil lands for Cowtown, where he was on Raucous Theater and Undercity Sewers. So double tap land with only 24 lands in the deck and getting it done.
Just getting it done just allows more agency over your game. Rockside really kind of operates more to me like a vintage or a legacy deck, like than it really does a cEDH deck, which is kind of funny.
It forces you to lean into like, okay, I have to do something broken. Sure, yeah, you can have games that are just like turn 1, land and mana, turn 2, Rhystic Study. People feed my Rhystic, I win on turn 3. But like it really encourages you to lean into like, okay, I'm gonna have 5 mana on turn 1 or something close to it, you know, untap with that and then try to win on turn 2 with some amount of backup. We're just jamming.
It is one of the decks that I feel probably the most pressure to try to win beforehand. So anytime that I play and I have a Rogsai in my pod, I don't ever feel like I get where I can kind of just develop my game plan.
Yeah, I get to go land dork pass.
Yeah, I kept a hand against that particular matchup that had like a turn 2 present win, and it was too slow.
Yeah,
it was too,
especially when with the, and it's something I've seen more of. Like I talked about Sharky's Tevish Kraum. And then I've seen a few others, like I think I saw a Stella Lee, some other more proactively signing decks starting to run more of the extra turn effects. Because that's one of the biggest strengths of Rocksai is they're just like, I'm going to win turn 2, but it's going to be my 3rd turn. Where they're able to just do some setup, maybe do a Necro, whatever, DT, take an extra turn, untap, and then just go off, slam a defense grid, and then just like, okay, anybody got anything? Nope. Okay, well, I'll win. They, like a lot of decks we'll talk about, when you have the black tutors, they do get a lot of flexibility to, in the early game, a lot of times you get to make the choice of, do I go for, if I'm doing a slower plan, like a turn 3 attempt, do I want to go turn 2 Rhystic or turn 2 Necropotence or go for like a Protected Naz on turn 3, or like they get the flexibility of, I'm going to jam something really fast at people and I can set myself up for that maybe not working out better with one of the normal draw engines, or I could just keep going deep and see what happens. They do get into spots again, like any of the decks that don't have draw engines in the zone where they're gonna be in a top deck war at some point, or if things keep failing. But look at their deck, look at the top decks, look at the amount of gas they have, and it just keeps going up. Like Flare of Duplication is like incredible gas that also changes the dynamic of Rockside tables forever. Like that card completely changes your ability to present early wins against Rockside because they want you to Nos. Like they are hoping that you will Nos before them at this point, and then they can just sandbag a flare or just flare a demonic tutor. That's good. I'll do that. I'll make that play a decent amount of the time.
Yeah, Rockside, good deck. Oof. We've been talking about it.
This and the next 2 decks we're talking about, I probably will put a tier list up because this isn't, again, like, we always say, this isn't our ranking of the decks. This is just who got the most top 16s. I'll probably will put a tier list up of these decks and maybe some of the closer ones at the bottom of what I think. I think this and the 2 above it are like they're the top tier right now.
Oh, for sure. For sure. And there's not much can be said about our next deck list, Sisay Weatherlight Captain, with 46 top 16s, 150 entries for a 30.67% conversion rate. Sisay, really strong deck. Ultra abuses the format. I think where there's a lot of blue farm or even something like Rogsai or decks that are trying to fight those decks, it just gets to play to the battlefield. I don't know how many times I've played with or against Sisay, and then the rest of the pod just doesn't know how it wins, even though like it's pretty self-explanatory.
And it's super popular.
And it's super popular. It's just like people just kind of, they don't know how to fire the removal spell. Just go watch my feature match in the last round of Cowtown. But with that being said, Sisay is just a really good deck. I think it's the like best dockside deck because it's the only one where dockside, like if makes X amount, it wins the game, like Magda and stuff. Like I know everybody like freaks out when they see it in Corvold. It's obviously very powerful. It's busted in Corvold. It's like it has to keep going versus like, no, I'm just showing you the dockside. I'm winning. So you have to stop me now. You know, it's one of those kind of decks. I think it's a great deck. It's not my flavor. I like the Clam Chowder build. It's pretty powerful.
It's an interesting spot where it gets to be in the Planeswalker build just a pretty fair, chill deck for most of the game, where it's sitting behind permanents. It runs a low to medium amount of interaction, prioritizes removal to deal with things like Op Agent, which they have to, and then they just break dockside better than any of the other top decks do. Like you said, like Corvold gets to break it by spinning its wheels afterwards. Like you can turn one treasure into a win with Corvold. Sisay is just, the count is like 8. Okay, I'll just win, which is gross, that happens. It doesn't even need, really 5 is like the point where they maybe, depending on other factors, can just win. Once it hits 10, you're just screwed. Once it's 10, you've basically already lost, unless the Sisay's not in play or something.
So that's actually a really good point, and I'll touch up on this real quick. I don't mean to cut you off, but what you just said about Sisay being able to just play into the game and let the game progress and develop past turns 4. So that's exactly what it can do. So it inherently just becomes a better dockside deck because the longer the game goes, the better dockside typically becomes.
Yeah.
So versus like having to put all this pressure on dockside on like turn 2 or turn 3, that 4 to 5, can really, just be the make or break for the dockside where you get maybe like double activation off of a Sisay with that. So that's something to be, again, the strength of Sisay. And it's so strong that it literally made me change a card in my whole deck list for moving forward. In terms of the way when I go back and I look at how powerful the top 10 is with particular commanders and how warping Sisay can be in a game, I think you have to go back or at least reconsider Opposition Agent as a card that we always talk about how it doesn't belong in turbo decks, but I always think of like, if that card comes down, that card warps the game. And that's enough. That's like almost as good as a removal spell. It's obviously just a really powerful card on its own. It has flash. We have Bowmasters that have flash. So it plays into a little bit different. Obviously, other decks can play it. I could see potentially if Rogsai is really ever worried about like the format, target some Sisay. I think cutting a wheel for, something like that could be a good choice. I could be wrong, but I'd say Opposition Agent stocks have probably never been higher.
I think typically for ROG, you're playing to threaten Sisay is like, well, they don't run counter spells, get wrecked, and just jam down their throat. And you could, but yeah, and Sisay, especially wild that there are for a while, we've talked about Clam Chowder, but it wasn't anything I ever covered. Like it hadn't really got popular. It hadn't been in any of the events that I had done coverage on until recently, where it does have a top. And I'm seeing the deck more, like I'm seeing it when I'm playing games at events. I'm seeing those builds of Sisay. And the fact that it's already like one of the most powerful and consistent commanders, and there's just a second build that is definitely a viable deck. How the numbers will shake out for Sisay is kind of, we'll see. But like, I could see a world where in the next update or by the end of the year, we're going to wish that or want EDH top 16 to have like an archetype filter, because Sisay might just have like 2 very viable, equally represented decks that play pretty differently. Just because it's that ridiculous of a commander. Like that is a pretty busted commander to be able to support that. And I'm probably going to be doing a video helping this, but that is definitely a deck you cannot go to a tournament and not know how Sisay works and expect good results. You will get into a pod where there's a Sisay, you plan enough events. I promise you it's the 3rd most popular, and the 2nd most popular is probably going to drop in its numbers when people keep losing and losing and losing with Kinnan. I fully expect Sisay to be like 2nd in popularity in the next update. If it's not Nadu, if Nadu stocks don't go insane, I expect Sisay to float around those numbers. And as it stands, could go to number 1, but number 1, the gap is still really big right now. So we'll see. And they just get upgrades every freaking set. They make a new legend for this stupid deck. So definitely educate yourself on the Sisay lines. Clam Chowder, you already know how it works. Basically, like it's 5-color stuff. They'll go get a meal and they'll kill you. The Planeswalker builds, definitely learn how to interact with those. You need to know it. This is a top contender. And then number 1. Big old gap in all the numbers, as usual. We've got 72 top 16s. And I will mention, Sisay was a big gap over Roxai, too. Kinnan at 4th jumped up from 19 to 28 for Roxai, which jumped up from 28 to 46 for Sisay. And then Tymna Kraum jumping up to 72 top 16s, 292 entries for a 24.66% conversion rate. Weakness of Tymna Kraum and some of these we've done has been a okay conversion rate. Close to 25% for the most represented in the field by a lot. It's almost double Sisay. That's not a weak number. That's really good when it's the most popular deck and a quarter of people who bring it top 16. Notably, Tymna Kraum has received almost nothing recently from Thunder Junction and MH3. We've seen a couple run Chthonian Nightmare, which I don't really expect to stay. I think if you don't have an outlet for that, it doesn't make sense as a card. It's a decent enough card. It's cool with like Ranger Captain and stuff like that. So I don't expect that to stay. I've seen one that I've covered with Sink into Stupor. I don't expect that one to stay either. I think the cost on a monocolor land, it's not Otawara good. Deck hasn't really changed, and I guess it could go down post MH3, but like it's still just here. It's still just the best deck. There's been no new cards. They've been cleaning the deck up. Some cards have come out. We've talked about how Boromir has pretty much disappeared from successful Tymna Kraum decks. One of the biggest changes, we basically, if you watch my coverage, you know that it's like, here are the 13 Tymna Kraum creatures. We are seeing more decks that are opting to cut Drannith Magistrate and go down to 12 creatures. Usually opting for something like Miscast or Dispel or something in that slot to help win the Counterspell Wars. For the most part, Tymna Kraum is the exact same deck it's been, since we did at least the like January update or the one before that, probably.
Yeah, so 2 things about Tymna Kraum. Number 1, how many wins do you think it has in these tournaments that we're covering? It's got 6 wins.
Okay, yeah.
So that's pretty insanity. So not only does it just have a really good conversion rate, it has a really good top 16 rate, it also is converting to those wins. Like that's pretty good. I've said this before. I don't like the deck at all. I still think it's the best deck in the format. As like a clear metric, like across the board, I think it's the best deck. I think Rogsai in the hands of a really good pilot is the most powerful magician deck you could play. But when you get like really just good players like Freedom Waffle and people of that ilk playing the list, they're going to do really well. And then we'll take the winner from Cowtown's list. They are like all in on like the extra enchantment stuff.
Yeah.
And like
pretty interesting
copy
stuff.
Artifact, copy enchantment, that kind of stuff. So
Steel enchantment too.
Yeah, they just basically act as like all these clone effects. And it really should just be called 4-color clones because that's what it seems like it's turning into.
Yeah,
but
4-color clowns, more like it.
No, they're definitely the Patriots dynasty. They're just vanilla, good, consistent. They'll get you there.
The things that have changed a little bit, so people still aren't sure on Smothering Tithe. That goes in and out. Your Necropotence is another one where it's like, I want to say closer to half of them now, but it's probably a little bit less than that of the top 16 Tymna Kraums are on Necropotence. And then, yeah, you are starting to see Copy Artifact, which I first covered with Freedom Waffle running it at Command Fest Tacoma. And then now we saw it, Freedom Waffle still running it at Cowtown. And then Isaac, I think, was the person who won Cowtown, who was running Copy Artifact. And then, like you said, Copy Enchantment and Steel Enchantment. Really just taking advantage of that deck's ability to just sandbag and be flexible. That's kind of the thing. Like, if you're not leaning into like, hey, I'm going to do early-ish like win attempts and then fall back on Tymna Kraum, the other part of the plan is like, okay, I have a Fimage. This will be a Grand Abolisher or a Dockside at some point, and I'll draw cards and I'll figure out a way to win. Like, just that ability to have that Grixis core, draw more cards than anyone else, and then finish off with a, Cavern of Souls, Grand Abolisher, or just a silence protected by 15 counter spells into a breach win. Like they just get all the good stuff and pretty good commanders. I know I still hear people talk about Tymna stocks being low right now. I know when I was playing against Ori at Cowtown, he said he never wanted to put another Tymna trigger on the stack again. And that's why he's playing Roxai. I mean, the deck's still doing the thing. That's the thing. Like we can talk about it. How it's like, oh, Tymna's bad, Kraum is mid, whatever. But like, they're still here and like Blue's Clues isn't, right? Like in the same colors. A deck that I like and I think is good, but they're not here. And is it these colors are the best and they're just overrepresented with Tymna Kraum? Do you actually think what are your thoughts on the actual commanders right now?
So some of the games that I heard like that happen, I mean, I saw like a Turbo Kraum game where like the game was just over. Like it had a Kraum like early as I think it was like turn 1, and then it just drew a bunch of cards, and then it had exact like protection, just went for the win. It had I think that was Bailey's reverse Thoracle on camera, which was disgusting. Again, it has the Dockside button. It has the Thoracle button. So it just has these 2 ultra powerful cards still available to its deck. As like commanders, I think it's always going to be based on the texture of the game. You could have a Tymna, but you just didn't draw that side of your deck where you drew the creatures. So your Tymna just sucks.
And I think that's why we have seen creature counts go down in these decks. And in general, people build less for Tymna.
Yeah. I still think Kraum's like insane. Like I'm still one of those people. It's really easy to cast. It's easy to cast off of like a Mana Vault and those kind of cards, Grim Monolith, Jeweled Lotus. Its floor is
at least a 4/4. His floor is at least a Flying Haste 4/4.
Yeah, a Flying Haste 4/4 that pressures life. So, and if anybody else interacts with the particular player and they cast multiple spells, you're drawing a card here.
That's the real broken part of Kraum, where early game he can work as like a soft rule of law, where like you might get a card, like people, especially if you get him out, say your last in turn order, you get him out after everyone's developed, you might get like 2 cards a cycle or something. But once the counterspell wars happen, people forget about Kraum triggers. And he gets so fed. And when you're like the second or third person to make the win attempt and you just drew cards off of every counterspell war, like he gets you so much more value than Tymna ever can in a game. In those spots where Tymna Kraum kind of wants to be. If they're not making the super early win attempts, they're like turn 4, oh, Kraum just drew me like 7 cards in this turn cycle because of counterspell wars. It's gonna be pretty easy to find a win. Like he is definitely the boy right now for that deck. Not a lot to say about it. It's not people weren't too excited that MH3 came out in the same deck as it's like gonna be at the top. But
yeah, well, I think a lot of the MH3 cards in practice aren't as good as they appear.
Yeah, and that might be something we talk about on an episode soon too. I think we'll have a better view of it when we get a full quarter with the cards versus like a month-ish with them, and like especially when covering, like I've covered a decent amount of, we're seeing way more non-proxy like big Command Fest events where especially like the weekend of, people don't have those cards. Any thoughts on this top 10? Were you surprised by it? Is this about what you expected going into this quarter?
I didn't expect Stella Lee to be as high as it was. I knew it had a hot start. I didn't know it like kind of continued. I thought I was a little shocked Corvold was as high as it was. I don't know where Kennan's going to be. That's another one. I didn't know Kinnan had that many tops. I knew his conversion rate was dropping. Blue Farm Sisay, Roxai, I think they're like in their own like class. Like those are the Foxes and Marths of the world of Smash, so they're up there. We'll see. Because I mean, like, let's be real. Let's cEDH any of these decks with the right draw and the right composition. People mulliganing. There's so many factors they could win. That's why they're here. They've all done well or did something in an event that gave them their numbers. And the Invitational, I think, is going to be a very different format than a traditional Open. An Open's going to have everybody. This is going to be more like, I hate to use the term, but more of a very Pro Tour selective thing. I think it would be very cool once all the decks are entered sometime midday. They make a post or something on the website about a post about the metagame breakdown for the top 64 for the Invitational. They do that with Haruyua. It's really awesome. It just gives you an insight, something kind of like what Frank Karsten does. I think that would be really cool. And I think you're just going to get the best decks for this event. People aren't going to pull any punches. They're not going to try to bring something cute, unless you're me. I like to play Magic on hard modes.
Well, if you bring what got you there, at least, you can't call it too cute, right? If it was good enough to get you there,
yeah,
it's too good to be called cute anymore.
We actually had quite a few people ask me this at the venue. We didn't do like kind of a recap, honestly. So this is kind of like just like a super, super mini one. Really appreciate all the support. We had awesome fans that came up to us. This is probably one of the first times that it really kind of impacted me and made me kind of step back and, go, oh shit, people actually listen to the show,
Yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah, and it was just, the support was awesome. It was very humbling. I honestly wasn't in the right mental space for the event. I had a lot of personal things kind of literally crop up the night before the tournament. I'm going to tell you this, and this is the thing that people ask me. They want to know not just about how do you prep for a tournament, playing, but how do you prep mentally? Because I feel like sometimes that's my strongest attribute, is my ability to not break under certain situations. But this event especially just shows me I wasn't prepared. I made a lot of like nutritional mistakes and just overall like stress management. I think that would be kind of an interesting episode to do. It's just how to prep for a tournament and get prepared and, kind of separate yourself from the rest of the pack.
Let us know down below what you think of the top 10 decks of the last quarter. What do you expect to pop off in this next quarter? That is going to be, this next month is going to be tons of like gold level events firing off, people trying to like scramble to get those last few points to qualify for the Invitational. And then of course the Invitational itself, which we're going to have to cover, going to be a huge deal. Just let us know if you enjoy this video, like, comment, subscribe, follow on Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. Let us know what you want us to talk about next time. We do these updates every quarter, so in between there, we're always looking for new topics, either for the podcast or for Lemora's cards. And with all that being said, thank you so much for watching, and as always, go play cEDH. Have a good one, everybody.